Hello, and welcome to the Happy Relationships Guidebook. Finally, how to get it right. I'm Leslie Capps, your host, and I'm really excited, as you know I always am, about our topic and speaker today. Our speaker is Marie Elizabeth Malley, and she is a relationship artist. She helps successful professionals refine how they relate so that the love and pleasure they have in their relationship supports them in expanding their professional success. And we'll have her define that. So I wanted to get it right though. But what
Beautiful.
drew Marie Elizabeth to helping others was when she had a crisis of her own in her fairy tale life and marriage. So Marie Elizabeth is a published poet. She is an underwater photographer, and she loves to dive with sharks. Just a few of her assorted talents. She has a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine and another in poetry. And if you visit her website, which is Malley, which is MEMALI.com, memally.com, there you can find not only how to work with her, but her poetry, articles, as well as her underwater photography, which is phenomenal. So you should definitely check that out. As well, she is offering a free gift, which is a quiz of where are you on the artful love continuum. So be sure and check that out in the links and find out where you are. There you go. So welcome, Marie Elizabeth. I'm happy to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited for today's topic because it's how to identify your values so standards and boundaries can be negotiated. Because I'll tell our audience that it was really important for me to have standards and boundaries in this. And then I started researching a little on my own, and one person says, oh, they're too high. And another person says, oh, they're not high enough. And yeah, when I read, what people were saying, I was like, no wonder we're sort of confused. So yeah, I'm hoping and I'm knowing that you were going to help us suss all that out today.
You got it.
So yeah, define what a relationship, before we get really started, define what a relationship artist is and how you help people.
Well, a relationship artist, I love that phrase because as a creative person, and most of the people I work with are creative in some way, even if they don't self-define as creative. I believe we're all creative people in some way. And there's a place where we've typically carved out our creative genius. For many of us, it's our work. For moms, maybe it's how they relate to their kids. If they're stay-at-home moms, their genius is how they mother, right? But we have a place where we've carved out a space for our genius. However, it rarely is in our relationship. So I call myself a relationship artist. I teach relationship artistry because I believe there's an art to relating to others. There's a way that you can take your natural gifts, your genius, and bring it into your relationship with your intimate partner to serve the relationship and have the relationship be as fulfilling and joyful as wherever the other place your genius tends to express itself can be.
Sure. And I can also see how that would apply to all the relationships in your life if you were able to combine those two separate halves of yourself.
That's it. The idea is wholeness, allowing your creativity and strength and really the best of who you are, your deepest essence that's beneath all the stuff that can get in the way. To allow that out in all areas of your life creates an integrated whole and more fulfillment.
Sure, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Well, are you ready to dive into values, standards, and boundaries?
You bet.
She said, woo. Yeah. First of all, would you just define for us values, just so we're all sort of on the same page and know what we're talking about?
Well, the simplest way I can say it is really your values are the things that matter most to you in your life. And so doing the work to get clear on those. So we all have values, but we don't always know our values. And I think that's the piece of work that we're talking about here, is actually getting clearer on what are the most important things to me, maybe the top 5 to 10 things, because that's going to inform the choices that I make. And if I'm not deliberate about knowing what they are, then I have no framework within which to make decisions that align with who I really am.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do you find, at least I've found, like going forward in my life, that some of my values, maybe in past years that I wouldn't have placed as big an emphasis on, are now like who I am?
Absolutely. I think as we're growing up, we inherit values from others. So we learn our family's values. We learn our educational system's values. If we have been raised with religion, we learn our religion's values. And we learn our overall culture's values. And so as we're growing up, we're taking in a lot of information, but we don't quite know who we are yet. And as I see it, the path of growing into being a true artist in your life is figuring out which ones of those to keep, which ones are really yours, and which ones to set aside because they no longer really fit. You realize, okay, I got this from my family, but you know what? That's not really true for me anymore now that I'm an adult and I'm discovering who I am as a person. And so it's important to make exactly that shift that you're talking about, going from the values that we inherit, as I like to language it, to our true values that we've discovered by a process of inquiry.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. So, so do you feel like relationship values are the same as your life values?
I love this question because it's, I feel like it's a subset. And when you talk about relationship values as compared to life values, the life values are really sort of you, your own heart, all you. Relationship values, by their nature, need to take in the existence of another.
Sure.
And so when you come together with another person in relationship, you've got your values, they've got their values. They may not be the same. So there is, in a sense, a third set of values that can emerge, that is the values of the relationship itself. I believe that when two people come together, they create a third, or what I call the union. So it can be a really amazing way of deepening your relationship to actually share each of your individual values with each other and spend some time to craft the values of the union, because they'll incorporate each of your values, but there might be some different one, or one in the middle. Let's say one partner really values security and the other one values adventure
Right.
and novelty, right? So they're going to need to have a conversation to find, well, what is the values, where do we meet in the union around those two things that we both have different values around? Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you're so right. We really don't think about it like that. We're like, we're bringing our values, you're bringing your values, like it'll all work out. And you're right. We are,
Right.
if we're really creating a relationship, then we are having to come up with that third set. Yeah. I think it's a beautiful way
Indeed.
to describe it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I love how you said that, creating our relationship, because that's the distinction I'm talking about. Most of us get into relationship by default, and we're repeating the patterns we've been taught and that we saw our parents do and that we see in the movies, and that all the stuff, we're just kind of regurgitating what we think relationship is. And the difference between going from a default kind of relationship that tends to not work so well over time, to being an agent, a creative agent in your relationship, that's the difference. As soon as you start to approach your relationship as something you co-create with your partner, or
Right.
partners if you're polyamorous, if it's something you co-create, the whole game changes. It comes alive. There's so much more potential. You get to learn about yourself. You get to grow. You get to expand beyond who you were taught to be into your real self. And that's the thrill to me of working with people in that spot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Seeing that change and seeing that excitement and like, yeah, I can do this kind.
I
Yeah.
can do that. I
Right.
didn't know that I could,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I didn't know I could bungee jump off a cliff, but guess what? I can, you
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly.
And it doesn't have to be
Expand.
that dramatic. It also can be like, I didn't know that I could sit and listen to my partner's upset and actually take it in with equanimity and listen and then respond calmly. I didn't know I could do that. I thought that I just always had to yell back.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can be that, or it can be big and dramatic, any of it, but it's all discovery and growth, which is so exciting.
Yes. Yes. I know we get excited just listening to you talk about it. So,
Thank you.
so then how do we begin the process of identifying our values?
Well, I like to begin with folks by first reflecting on the most important events of their life to date.
Hmm.
So maybe the 10, 20 most formative moments, good and bad, like
Right.
across the spectrum, the highs and the deepest lows. And then after doing that, looking for the common thread between those events. Did they all involve other people? What's the balance of events that are me stretching my edges, going to dive in Indonesia by myself for the first time, whatever it is, right?
Right.
Um, so what's the common thread around connection, around growth, around love? Where are the moments of greatest suffering? What are the threads of connection between the greatest suffering? And by looking at it that way, you begin to get a sense of what matters most to you. So I find that a really grounded way to get into the question. And then you start to write down, oh, like love is really important to me. Connection or belonging is really important to me. Adventure might be really important to me, et cetera, like that. But you figure out, it's not a heady, if you try to do it from up here, you're not going to have as great a result. Like if you're just looking at a list of values on Google and go, oh,
Right.
well, I like that. And that sounds good. And oh, yeah, I should want passion because passion's important. And versus allowing your life to teach you what your values are, I think is much more grounded and potent a way to get in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very powerful suggestion. Not only that, we all know that if you decide that you want the value of passion in your life, you can pull that in as well. But it
You
absolutely
totally
gives you a way to
can.
see where you are.
Yeah, like to see where you start, right? And because I also like when I have my clients create their values, and we do this in kind of a longer process.
Sure.
It's one of the longer calls that we have. And when I have clients do that, I like to have a mix of, these are my native values, and these are some values that are important to me that I aspire to. Like some of them you want to stretch for a little bit because your values are also, maybe in a list on your desk or on your wall or somewhere where you can see them. I keep mine on my phone in a notes field. And when I'm feeling wobbly, I'll look at them and remember who I am. So it's okay to have a few aspirational ones, but you don't want them to be so far out there that it doesn't feel real yet. There
Right.
needs to be a mix of like, oh yeah, this is what I naturally do. And then I want to cultivate some more of this because it does matter to me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome suggestions. So, why are values important to establish before we start a relationship?
Well, I think it helps your picker be more accurate. Like, I don't know a fancy way to say it, but it's
Right.
like, a lot of us, our picker is totally off because we don't know who we are. And again, we have this jumbled idea of what we want based on our cultural upbringing in our family. And, maybe our family wasn't that great. So we have a lot of fear and, all the things that tend to kind of inform our picker.
Right.
So by knowing your values, when you're going out and you're meeting people, if you tend to behave more in alignment with yourself, so you don't start twisting yourself into some other person to try to get a partner, because
Right.
that never works.
Right.
And B, you can begin to feel, how does this person impact me? Do they relate to me in ways that are in alignment with what matters to me? you know Or are there red flags that show up right away because this person is critical or dismissive, and I have a value on kindness, for example. So it really allows your picker to be more accurate and give you a better chance of actually meeting someone who aligns with your true self.
Right, right. And I think, at least what I'm hearing you say too, is it allows us to be a little more selective and actually noticing the red flags.
Right. And noticing the good too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I want to name a thing where so often we're out there looking for the red flags. And of course, we're going to find the red flags, like everybody, nobody's perfect. But how red is that flag? How big is the flag? And do they meet enough of the good stuff that we want that we can work with those things, right? But unless you know what the good stuff is that you're looking for, you're not going to be able to recognize that either, because you're busy out there looking for what you don't want.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So once we know our values, how do they help us set boundaries and standards?
Well, I love this transition, because one of my favorite quotes about boundaries is by Mark Groves, and it goes like this: walls keep everybody out. Boundaries teach people where the door is.
Oh,
so
nice.
By knowing your values, you can be more anchored in your center, in your sense of self, as you meet people, as you're creating your relationship with your potential partner. And it allows you to have boundaries instead of walls. And I'm going to break this down a little further.
Okay.
By telling a story. A yoga teacher I had 20 years ago said, when your core is strong, and he didn't mean like your stomach, he meant your inner core. When your core, like your core, when you're strong in your center, knowing who you are, your outside can be soft. But when you're weak in here, when you are not clear about who you are, you create a shell. You have to make walls instead of boundaries. I mean, to mix these two people's way of saying it. So I see values as, knowing your values as the way to have that strong center, so that you can create boundaries, have an outside that's soft, firm, but soft, like permeable. You can let people in, as opposed to creating walls like, I need to be safe and you can't do blah, blah, blah. That's a wall type of behavior. And you're doing that because you are not clear inside and you don't feel strong.
Yeah.
And so values to me create the kind of strength that allow for having a door to let people come in, but being clear about where that door is and what allows you to open that door, and the kind of behaviors and actions they need to do to have you want to open that door to them.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's beautifully put. And I love that analogy, because we can all visually see that about the walls, and yet then creating a door, and being soft on the outside, because I think that's a natural human tendency, is to, we get hurt. And so boom, the walls go up. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And then it's a hard time unshinking them.
Exactly. And I just heard a beautiful quote this past weekend. Oh, who said it? Kyle Cease, Cease. He's a transformational comedian. And in a video clip I saw this past weekend, he said, what if nobody's broken your heart? What if what they broke was your expectations? Oh,
yeah. Wow. Right? A very powerful way to sort of change our paradigm.
Right. And recognize our innate strength. Our heart is resilient, but it's the thing out here that gets fragile and broken, and the more we have expectations, that tends to set up more of that fragility.
Sure. Yeah. Ooh, how exciting.
Sorry, that was a little off topic, but I think related.
I think it fit right in.
Okay, good.
And if you hang around me too long, I'm happy to squirrel off. So.
Oh, yay. I'm such a squirrel chick.
I know, that's why I provide questions for everybody, because I'm like, I need to stay on track.
I love that. It's good.
So do we need to measure then, and maybe you've already answered this, but do we need to measure our standards and boundaries against our values?
Okay, the way this is landing in me
Right.
is as an outside in question versus an inside out question. So the question, do I need to measure my standards and boundaries against my values? That means we're setting the boundaries and standards and then going to the values second. We're going from the outside in. And the shift I'm proposing is to actually go from the inside out so that your standards and boundaries flow out of your values. They're not something you set first, that you are clear about who you are, what you want, what matters most to you. And then the behaviors and attitudes that you invite into your life in the form of other people come out of that they don't happen separately or from the outside in, but that it actually goes the other way.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. And I think that definitely clears up sort of that boundary standard, too high, too low. Yeah. Like
exactly, because if you're creating them from the inside out, if they are aligned with who you are when you're in your truth of yourself, again, when you're not in your cracked personality or your shenanigans, you know, like when you're not in the stuff that you picked up, but you're in your actual essence of your amazingness as a human on this planet, you know,
right.
When you are creating those standards and boundaries out of that place, the question of too much or too little doesn't even arise, because it's alignment. It's a shift to alignment versus good, bad, up, down, too much, too little. Like if somebody just doesn't meet your values, your boundaries, it's not your boundaries problem of being wrong. It's that they're just not the right person.
Right.
You know, if your boundaries have been created out of your essence, out of who you really are, if they've come out of your values, then it's like a radio station. You know, you're either right on the station and hearing the signal clearly, or you're slightly off the station and like that. That's how I see it. It's like either the person is tuned into the station and you can resonate and have meet each other, truly meet, or like you're off the station and it's like between you, and then you just know, like, oh, not my person. Like,
right.
Or maybe there's a little work we need to do to refine the dial and get us on track. It's not necessarily not my person. It's just like, oh, there's some static.
Right.
How do we fine tune the dial so that we are resonating and able to speak without static?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. As women, we tend to like forget our values when we're in love.
Oof.
And
indeed.
Yeah.
So we do. There are so many reasons this happens, and I think a lot of it is this energy. It's part of it is chemical, part of it is kind of involuntary and out of our control. So when we fall in love, all sorts of yummy brain chemistry begins to be released, and the oxytocin that wants to bond, and the dopamine that's full of pleasure, and all that stuff begin. And so we're driven by that. So there's a piece that's kind of chemical, but you got to keep a little bit of your awareness in the game and notice, like, oh, my chemicals are going off. Like, let me just have a little bit of attention here to make sure this is still aligned. That you just don't fling yourself headlong into romance and miss important information because you're being driven by that need to be together, or by that lust, or by, and I'm a fan of all that stuff. I'm I'm all about it, but integrated with the rest of you, that you're not self-abandoning for something that's only partial.
Sure. Yeah, it's a good drug trip.
It's a great drug trip, exactly. But eventually it's going to come to an end, as all good trips do.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, your serotonin drops and you're on the floor and you hate life. And it's like, is this person still, can they meet me here in the trenches, not just on the peak of the mountain,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And I also, it feels like too, that this would be valuable in affect all your other relationships as well. I know we're talking about obviously
Yeah.
intimate relationships, but as you learn your values and are able to take down the walls and open doors, it's got to impact every relationship in your life.
It sure does, and for better or worse, right? Like, you may find as you begin to get clearer on these things that some of your relationships no longer fit. And maybe you discover, like, oh, wow, a lot of my other relationships in my life have been based on this other thing. I was striving for success. And so I've surrounded myself with people who are driven and striving. And I thought that's who I was. But wow, I'm realizing I have a more tender, part of me that always, and none of my friends want to do that with me. Maybe I need to find some friends who also who are driven and purpose driven and love what they do and want to be out in the world, but who also deeply want to connect and relax and speak on this deeper level and be able to connect in a heart-centered way. Maybe you don't even realize that till you do your values, right? But then you start to expand your friend group to include more contemplative people, because you've realized you're actually secretly contemplative. Who knew? Right? So I think it allows you to refine your entire life. As I like to say, like, refine how you relate to yourself, to others, and to your work. How you relate to all of it. It's all relationship. Relationship is the foundation of life. Everything is a relationship.
Right? Yeah.
So the clearer you can show up within it, the more all the relationships in your life begin to tune to the station,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That feels good.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And everything seems to work a little better and happier.
It does. It does. And sometimes, I'm not going to lie, like, sometimes there's some loss involved. Sometimes there are relationships that have to be ended.
Right.
And you got to keep your focus on the attunement, on the alignment, that you're ending things that don't have the capacity to move from to a clear station. Some do, some don't. And the ones that don't, let them go. Because there are plenty of people who are attuned to the station that you are, that are going to lift you up and nourish you and feel great to be around.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, it's very true. I think we sometimes forget that too. As we begin to change, there are people that cannot make that change with us.
Sad, but true.
Yeah. And so, right, you got to stay true to your own journey.
You do. And acknowledge the loss, acknowledge the grief. You don't just kind of go, well, forget that
Right.
one. It's like, oh my God, we've been friends for 20 years. I love this person. And we no longer fit. Like, that's sad.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is.
But you don't hang on to it just because it's sad,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're better off too. I mean, it's a
Exactly.
growth thing, and I think there's some sort of quote to that, seasons, like people come into your life for a season or a reason. And yeah, and when that's done, you say, gosh, it was great they were there. I so appreciated that support or whatever. And it's time to move on.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I've loved this conversation. Is there any last thoughts you would like to share with the audience today?
Oh, yes, one more.
Okay.
So when you focus on moving into life from your values, it begins to shift this idea. Okay, I'm going to go backwards for a second. So most of us tend to operate with an idea that I need to do these things to be happy. I need to strive. I need to have this much money in the bank. I need to have a relationship. I need to, have a kid. I need whatever the thing. We need to do all these things to be happy and to have success or have enjoyment or have, peace of mind, have security, whatever our thing is that we want to have. And there's always going to be potential for coming out of alignment when you start with doing stuff to get stuff. Because what's missing in that equation is who you're being. And so by focusing instead on orienting to what's most important to you, what matters most, your 5 to 10 deepest values, and then creating your doing, so I call that your being, creating your doing out of that, so your actions flow out of who you want to be, then what you get to have in your life is more likely going to be aligned with who you are, and you'll have so much more pleasure and enjoyment, instead of being one of these many people I see who work, you know, and then they make their goal of what they thought their goal was, and they look around and they feel empty.
Right.
They can't enjoy it because they burned all the bridges along the way, or they forgot to have relationships along the way, or any of that. And so by starting with your values, with the being, then choosing your actions in accordance with that, it's the way to then have what you get in your life actually feed you.
Sure. Right.
It's a much, it's just a better path to joy, I think.
Well, right. And you actually do achieve then, because you actually can find that happiness and that joy and creativity, all those things that I think ultimately and that sense of belonging that we're all ultimately searching for.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And belonging starts within.
Right.
By knowing who you are and loving that.
Right.
And doing all the work to, you know, find all the spots where you reject yourself and all that stuff. But to really come into alignment with your values is to belong to yourself. And from there, all the outside belonging actually takes care of itself. It doesn't have to, it's not so much work. You're not trying to squeeze in, fit yourself into somebody else's box.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Actually heard a woman say the other day, she said, I feel like if I'm myself, I'm going to be too much for people. I know it was sort of,
I've felt that way.
Yeah.
And so many of my clients have felt that way. It's such a common fear for us women.
Right. And yet if you look at it from the value side, it can really lessen that fear.
Right. Yeah. If you look at it from the value side and from the radio station side, right? And so it's not that you're too much, it's that they are not on your station.
Right. You haven't found the other people that are too much.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just all be too much together.
Yeah. Right. All right. Well, thank you so much. I've loved our chat, and I'm sure that our audience, and I know me personally, have felt some clarity on standards, boundaries, and values, and that we'll be able to take those out into the world and make great strides in our relationships. And be sure, everybody, and check out Marie Elizabeth's website, memali.com, as well as her free gift, which was the quiz, Where Are You on the Artful Love Continuum? So until next time, thank you, Marie Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It's been so great to talk to you. Thank you.
Yes. Take care.